I'm Megan, 25, and I thought Christmas dinner with my family would be the usual awkward affair of forced smiles and passive-aggressive comments. Instead, it became the moment my mother looked me dead in the eye in front of our entire extended family and declared, "You're the most useless child we have, Megan. Your siblings all contribute something meaningful to this family, but you just take up space." The silence that followed was deafening until I calmly replied, "That's interesting, Mom, considering I'm the one who's been paying your mortgage for the past 2 years." What happened next destroyed not just Christmas dinner, but the entire family dynamic that had oppressed me for decades, exposing secrets that would change everything forever. But before I tell you how my response unraveled 25 years of family lies and manipulation, I need to know, what would you have done if your parent humiliated you like this in front of everyone? Would you have stayed silent to keep the peace? Walked away quietly? Or dropped the truth bomb that would expose their hypocrisy forever? Let me know in the comments, hit that like button, and subscribe because this Christmas family drama is about to become the most savage takedown you've ever seen. To understand how my mother's Christmas cruelty became the catalyst for destroying our family's carefully constructed hierarchy, you need to know about the toxic dynamic that had defined my life for 25 years. I was the middle child in a family of 5 siblings, but somehow I'd always been positioned as the family disappointment while my brothers and sisters were celebrated as shining examples of success and virtue. My parents, Linda and David Richardson, had created a complex system of favoritism that consistently elevated my siblings' achievements while diminishing or ignoring mine. My older sister Amanda was the academic golden child. A pediatric surgeon who'd graduated from medical school with honors and married another doctor in what my parents considered the perfect professional match. Every family gathering featured extensive discussions of Amanda's latest medical achievements, her beautiful home in an upscale suburb, and her 2 children who were already being groomed for similar academic excellence. When Amanda spoke, everyone listened with rapt attention, and her opinions on everything from politics to parenting were treated as expert testimony. My younger brother Jake was the entrepreneurial star who'd started a successful tech company in his early 20s and had been featured in several business magazines as a young innovator to watch. My parents never missed an opportunity to mention Jake's financial success, his appearances at industry conferences, or his growing influence in the technology sector. His expensive car, luxury apartment, and frequent business travel were constant topics of prideful conversation at family events. My youngest sister Sarah was the creative genius who'd become a successful graphic designer for major advertising campaigns while also maintaining a popular lifestyle blog that had attracted thousands of followers. Her artistic talents were celebrated with the same enthusiasm that Amanda's medical achievements received, and her social media success was treated as evidence of her superior communication skills and creative vision. Then there was my twin brother Michael, who'd followed my father into the family construction business and was being positioned as the eventual heir to the company that my father had built over 30 years. Michael's practical skills, his strong work ethic, and his commitment to carrying on the family legacy made him the sentimental favorite who represented continuity and tradition in ways that my parents found deeply meaningful. And then there was me, Megan, the middle child who'd chosen a career in social work, earned a modest salary helping vulnerable families navigate complex systems, and lived in a small apartment that reflected my priorities rather than my earning potential. In my family's value system, my work with foster children and abuse survivors was seen as admirable but impractical, meaningful but not financially rewarding, important but not prestigious enough to warrant the kind of celebration my siblings received for their career achievements. The disparities in how our accomplishments were treated were stark and consistent. When Amanda bought her first house, my parents threw a housewarming party and contributed significantly to her down payment. When Jake's company received its first major investment round, they hosted a celebration dinner at an expensive restaurant and invited everyone they knew to share in his success. When Sarah's blog was featured in a national magazine, my mother posted about it on social media for weeks and organized a family gathering to commemorate the achievement. When I earned my master's degree in social work while working full-time and graduated summa cum laude, the acknowledgement was a brief congratulations at Sunday dinner and a suggestion that I might want to consider more practical career options now that I had additional qualifications. When I was promoted to program director at the nonprofit where I worked, overseeing a team of 12 social workers and managing a budget of over $2 million, the family response was polite but unenthusiastic compared to the celebrations that greeted my siblings' far less significant professional milestones. The psychological impact of being consistently treated as the least important family member was devastating to my self-esteem and sense of worth. Every family gathering became an exercise in feeling inadequate as conversation focused on my siblings' achievements while my own accomplishments were treated as minor footnotes. I began to internalize the message that my career choices were less valuable, my lifestyle was less enviable, and my contributions to the family were less significant than those of my brothers and sisters. But what my family didn't know, what I'd been carefully hiding for over 2 years, was that their financial stability was actually dependent on my supposedly useless contributions. The mortgage on my parents' house, the car payments for vehicles they couldn't afford on my father's reduced income as his business struggled, even some of the expensive gifts they'd been giving my siblings, all of it was being funded by my careful financial management and generous support that I'd provided without seeking recognition or credit. The truth was that my father's construction business had been failing for several years due to increased competition and his reluctance to adapt to changing market conditions. My parents' comfortable lifestyle had become unsustainable on their actual income, but their pride prevented them from admitting their financial struggles to their successful children who might judge them for their reduced circumstances. Instead, they'd come to me, the family disappointment, for help, knowing that I wouldn't judge them and wouldn't use their financial problems as leverage for better treatment. I'd been quietly covering their mortgage payments, car insurance, and various household expenses while they maintained the facade of financial stability that allowed them to continue playing the role of proud parents whose success was reflected in their children's achievements. My supposedly modest salary was actually being stretched to support not just my own needs but also to preserve my parents' dignity and my siblings' illusions about our family's financial security. The arrangement had started small, helping with a few bills during a particularly difficult month, but had gradually expanded as my parents' financial situation worsened and their pride prevented them from seeking help from their more obviously successful children. They knew that Amanda, Jake, Sarah, and Michael would ask questions about how they'd gotten into financial trouble and might suggest lifestyle changes that would threaten their ability to maintain appearances. I, on the other hand, had simply written checks without judgment or conditions, understanding that my parents' self-worth was tied to their ability to appear successful and that exposing their financial struggles would devastate them psychologically. My decision to help them secretly was motivated by love and compassion, but it had also enabled them to continue treating me as the family failure while using my money to fund their pretense of prosperity. Christmas dinner 2023 was supposed to be a celebration of family unity and shared success, with all 5 children gathered around the table to share our achievements and express gratitude for our blessings. Instead, it became the moment when my mother's cruelty finally pushed me beyond my limit for accepting undeserved criticism, and when the family's carefully constructed hierarchy would be revealed as a complete fiction built on lies and hidden subsidies that they never could have imagined. The financial crisis that had led to my parents' dependence on my support had begun 3 years earlier when my father's construction company started losing major contracts to younger, more technologically advanced competitors. David Richardson had built his business on relationships and traditional craftsmanship, but the commercial construction industry had shifted toward companies that could offer faster timelines, lower costs, and more sophisticated project management systems. His refusal to invest in new technology and modernize his operations had gradually eroded his competitive position. The first sign of trouble had been when my parents started making subtle comments about tightening their belts and being more careful with expenses. These hints were always accompanied by assurances that everything was fine and that they were simply being more responsible about their spending as they approached retirement. But I'd noticed that their usual generosity toward their children had diminished, and family gatherings were being held at home more often rather than at the expensive restaurants they'd previously favored. The truth about their financial situation emerged during a private conversation I'd had with my mother 18 months after the problems began. She'd called me in tears, explaining that they were 3 months behind on their mortgage and facing possible foreclosure. The bank had been patient because of my father's long-standing relationship with them, But their patience was running out, and my parents needed $8,000 immediately to bring their payments current. What made the situation even more desperate was my father's pride and his determination to hide their financial struggles from Amanda, Jake, Sarah, and Michael. He was convinced that his successful children would view his business failures as evidence of poor judgment or lack of business acumen, and he couldn't bear the thought of them losing respect for him. The man who'd spent decades positioning himself as the family patriarch and provider was facing the humiliation of admitting that he could no longer support his family's lifestyle. My mother's request for help had been accompanied by elaborate explanations about why they couldn't ask their other children for assistance. Amanda was too busy with her medical practice and young children to deal with family financial problems. Jake's tech company was going through a critical growth phase that required his complete attention. Sarah was launching her freelance design business and couldn't afford to take on additional financial obligations. Michael was still establishing himself in the construction industry and didn't have the resources to help significantly. The excuses for why my siblings couldn't help were creative and detailed, but the real reason was obvious. My parents were ashamed of their financial failures and believed that their more visibly successful children would judge them harshly for their predicament. They'd come to me because they viewed me as the family member who was least likely to lose respect for them, partly because I was already positioned as the unsuccessful child who wouldn't have grounds for judgment. My decision to help them had been immediate and unconditional. I'd used my emergency savings to bring their mortgage current and had begun providing monthly support that covered not just their housing costs but also car payments, insurance premiums, and various household expenses that their reduced income couldn't accommodate. The total amount I was contributing monthly was nearly $3,000, more than half of my take-home pay as a social work program director. To manage this financial commitment, I'd moved to a smaller apartment, eliminated most discretionary spending from my own budget, and taken on freelance consulting work during evenings and weekends to supplement my nonprofit salary. My lifestyle had become significantly more austere than it had been before my parents' crisis, but I'd accepted these sacrifices as necessary to preserve their dignity and prevent them from losing their home. The secrecy surrounding my financial support had required elaborate coordination to maintain the illusion of my parents' financial stability. I'd arranged for payments to be made directly to their creditors so that my siblings wouldn't accidentally discover the assistance during family financial discussions. My parents had agreed to present their improved financial situation as the result of better business management and successful cost-cutting measures rather than acknowledging the external support that was actually keeping them afloat. But maintaining this deception had also enabled my parents to continue treating me as the family disappointment while secretly depending on my financial success to fund their comfortable lifestyle. Every family gathering where my achievements were minimized while my siblings were celebrated was paid for, at least partially, by money I'd earned through work they considered less valuable than Amanda's medical practice or Jake's technology company. The psychological toll of providing significant financial support while receiving no recognition or appreciation was enormous. I was working 60-hour weeks between my day job and consulting work to fund my parents' lifestyle, but my contributions to the family were still being treated as less significant than my siblings' more visible but less financially substantial achievements. The irony of being called the family's least useful member while actually being their primary financial supporter was both infuriating and heartbreaking. What made the situation even more complex was my knowledge that my siblings had no idea about our parents' financial struggles or my role in resolving them. Amanda, Jake, Sarah, and Michael continued to view our parents as financially successful and themselves as the children who were making our parents proud through their achievements. They had no understanding that their ability to maintain relationships with financially stable parents was dependent on their supposedly unsuccessful sisters' sacrifices. The burden of keeping this secret had also prevented me from seeking emotional support from friends or other family members who might have helped me process the complexity of the situation. I couldn't explain why I was working so much overtime or why my lifestyle had become more restricted without revealing information that my parents had specifically asked me to keep confidential. The isolation of carrying this responsibility alone while being treated as the family failure was psychologically devastating. By Christmas 2023, I'd been providing this support for nearly 2 years, and the strain was showing in my health, my relationships, and my overall well-being. I'd gained weight from stress eating and lack of time for self-care, my social life had virtually disappeared due to my work schedule, and I'd ended a promising romantic relationship because I couldn't explain why I had no money for activities or travel despite having a decent job. But what made the situation truly unbearable was that my financial sacrifices hadn't earned me any additional respect or appreciation from my family. If anything, my parents' relief at having their financial problems solved had made them more confident in their criticism of my life choices, as if their successful management of the crisis proved that my concerns about their treatment of me were unfounded. The Christmas dinner where my mother called me the most useless child was the breaking point where 2 years of hidden sacrifice and unacknowledged contribution finally collided with a lifetime of being treated as the family disappointment. The woman who owed her financial stability to my generosity was about to learn exactly how useless I really was. Christmas dinner 2023 at my parents' house was supposed to be a celebration of family togetherness, but it had quickly devolved into the usual pattern of my siblings' achievements being showcased while my contributions were ignored or minimized. The dining room table was set with my mother's best china and filled with an elaborate spread that, unknown to my siblings, had been partially funded by my financial support over the past 2 years. As we gathered around the table, the conversation immediately turned to the traditional round of accomplishment sharing that characterized our family gatherings. Amanda began with updates about her latest medical research publication and her children's academic achievements at their elite private school. The pride in my parents' voices as they discussed her professional success and family stability was obvious and genuine, and other family members chimed in with questions and compliments that reinforced her status as the family's medical expert and parenting role model. Jake followed with exciting news about his tech company's expansion into European markets and his recent appearance on a business podcast that had generated significant industry attention. My father's enthusiasm for Jake's entrepreneurial success was particularly evident, as he saw Jake's business acumen as validation of his own career focus on building successful enterprises, even though his own business was currently struggling. Sarah shared updates about her latest high-profile design clients and her blog's growing influence in the lifestyle and wellness space. Her social media following had reached new milestones, and she'd been invited to collaborate with several major brands on marketing campaigns that would significantly increase her income and professional visibility. The creative success she'd achieved was exactly the kind of achievement that my artistic mother had always dreamed of, making Sarah's accomplishments particularly meaningful to our parents. Michael's updates focused on his growing role in our father's construction company and his plans for modernizing the business operations to improve competitiveness. The fact that he was taking initiative to address some of the challenges that had been causing financial problems made his contributions especially appreciated by my father, who saw Michael's involvement as ensuring the family business's future success. When the conversation turned to me, the shift in energy was subtle but unmistakable. My parents asked polite questions about my work with foster children and my nonprofit's recent programming expansion, but their enthusiasm was significantly more restrained than what they'd shown for my siblings' achievements. When I mentioned that our program had successfully helped over 200 families navigate the adoption process in the past year, the response was a brief "that's nice, dear" before the conversation moved on to other topics. The real tension began when my mother started making comparisons between my siblings' life choices and mine. "It's wonderful to see how well Amanda has balanced her career success with being a devoted mother," she said, clearly implying that my single status and childless state represented some kind of failure. "And Jake's business expansion shows real vision and ambition, the kind of thinking that creates lasting success." The subtle digs continued throughout dinner, with my mother finding ways to contrast my siblings' achievements with my more modest lifestyle. When Sarah mentioned her recent vacation to Europe, my mother commented on how rewarding it must be to be able to afford such luxuries through creative work. When Michael discussed his plans to buy a house, my father praised him for making smart financial decisions that would build long-term wealth. Each comment felt like a small knife, but I'd endured similar treatment for years and had learned to smile and change the subject rather than defending myself or pointing out the unfairness of the comparisons. What made this Christmas different was the accumulation of stress from working 60-hour weeks to fund my parents' lifestyle while receiving no recognition for my sacrifices, combined with the physical and emotional exhaustion of maintaining this secret for nearly 2 years. The breaking point came during dessert, when my mother began discussing her concerns about my future prospects and financial security. "I worry about Megan," she said to the table at large, as if I weren't sitting right there. "She's 25 and still living in that tiny apartment, working a job that barely pays enough to live on. Look at what her siblings have accomplished at similar ages." Amanda was already established in her medical practice, Jake had started his company, Sarah was building her client base. The criticism was particularly galling because my tiny apartment was actually a conscious choice I'd made to free up money for their mortgage payments, and my barely surviving financial situation was the direct result of my generous support for their household expenses. Every comparison she was making between my circumstances and my siblings' success was built on the foundation of sacrifices I'd made to preserve their dignity and financial stability. "I just think Megan needs to be more realistic about her career choices," my mother continued, warming to her theme. "Social work is a noble calling, but it's not practical for building the kind of life her siblings have created. Maybe it's time to consider more lucrative options that would allow her to contribute more meaningfully to the family." The phrase "contribute more meaningfully to the family" was the final straw that pushed me beyond my capacity for silence. For 2 years, I'd been contributing more meaningfully to this family than anyone else at the table, funding their mortgage and maintaining their lifestyle while working multiple jobs and sacrificing my own financial security. The woman who was lecturing me about contributing to the family was sitting in a house that I was paying for, eating food that my money had helped provide, maintaining a standard of living that would have been impossible without my secret support. "You know what, Mom," I said, my voice cutting through her lecture with deadly calm, "you're absolutely right that I should contribute more meaningfully to this family. In fact, let me start contributing right now by sharing some meaningful information with everyone." The table went quiet as something in my tone suggested that the conversation was about to take an unexpected turn. "Since you've decided to have this conversation in front of everyone, let's be completely honest about financial contributions to this family," I continued, setting down my fork and looking directly at each of my siblings. "Did you know that Mom and Dad have been behind on their mortgage for the past 2 years? Did you know that Dad's business has been failing and they've been struggling to pay their basic expenses?" The silence that followed was profound and shocked. My siblings' faces showed confusion and disbelief as they processed information that completely contradicted their understanding of our parents' financial situation. My parents looked horrified that their secret was being revealed, but also terrified about where my revelations were heading. "And did you know," I continued, my voice gaining strength as I prepared to deliver the truth that would shatter their comfortable assumptions, "that I've been paying their mortgage, their car payments, and most of their household expenses for the past 2 years? That's right, your useless sister has been working 60-hour weeks to keep Mom and Dad from losing their house while they've been criticizing my life choices and comparing me unfavorably to all of you." The explosion of shocked responses and confused questions that followed was exactly what I'd expected, but I wasn't finished destroying their illusions about our family dynamics. The silence that followed my revelation lasted only seconds before the table erupted in chaos as my siblings processed the magnitude of what I'd just revealed. Amanda was the first to find her voice, her medical training probably helping her move quickly from shock to analytical questioning. "Wait, what do you mean you've been paying their mortgage? How long has this been going on? Why didn't anyone tell us?" Jake's reaction was more emotional and accusatory. "This doesn't make sense. Dad always said the business was doing fine. You're telling me they've been lying to us for 2 years?" His entrepreneurial mind was clearly racing through the implications of concealed financial problems and the deception that had been necessary to maintain the family's facade of stability. Sarah looked devastated as she realized that her parents' ability to support and celebrate her creative endeavors had been subsidized by the sister they consistently minimized. "Megan, are you serious? You've been supporting them financially while they've been treating you like..." She couldn't finish the sentence, but her expression showed that she was beginning to understand the cruel irony of the situation. Michael's response was the most complex because his future in the family business was directly threatened by the revelation of its financial instability. "Dad, is this true? Is the company really in trouble? What does this mean for the expansion plans we've been discussing?" His voice carried a mixture of betrayal and panic as he confronted the possibility that his career plans were built on false foundations. But it was my parents' reactions that were most revealing. My father looked like he'd been physically struck, his face pale and his hands shaking as he realized that his deepest shame had been exposed to the children whose respect he'd been so desperate to maintain. My mother's response was pure rage. Not at being caught in years of deception, but at me for destroying the carefully constructed narrative that had allowed them to maintain their dignity while accepting my financial support. "How dare you humiliate us like this?" my mother hissed at me, her voice filled with venom. "We trusted you to keep this private, and you betrayed that trust just to make yourself look important. This is exactly the kind of selfish behavior that proves you don't understand what family loyalty means." The audacity of her accusation was breathtaking. The woman who'd just called me the most useless child in front of our entire family was now accusing me of selfishness for revealing the truth about my financial sacrifices. The parent who'd been accepting thousands of dollars monthly while allowing me to be treated as the family failure was lecturing me about family loyalty. "Family loyalty?" I repeated, my voice rising with righteous anger. "Let me tell you about family loyalty, Mom. Family loyalty is working 60-hour weeks for 2 years to save your house while you criticize my life choices. Family loyalty is moving to a smaller apartment and eliminating every luxury from my budget so you can maintain the lifestyle that lets you play the proud parents of successful children." I stood up from the table, my voice gaining power as years of suppressed frustration finally found expression. "Family loyalty is keeping your secrets while you use my money to buy Christmas presents for my siblings and then lecture me about not contributing meaningfully to this family. Family loyalty is sacrificing my own financial security to preserve your dignity while you reward my generosity by calling me useless in front of everyone." Amanda tried to intervene, her medical training making her instinctively want to de-escalate the conflict. "Megan, please sit down. Let's talk about this calmly. There has to be some explanation that makes sense of all this." But I was beyond de-escalation, and I had more truths to reveal that would make sitting down and talking calmly impossible. "Oh, there's definitely an explanation, Amanda," I said, turning to face my siblings directly. "The explanation is that our parents have been using my financial support to maintain the illusion of success that allows them to continue playing favorites with their children. Every family gathering where my achievements were minimized while yours were celebrated was funded by money I earned working multiple jobs." Jake's business mind was starting to grasp the full scope of the deception. "How much money are we talking about, Megan? What's the total amount you've given them?" His question wasn't motivated by concern for my sacrifices but by his need to understand the scale of the financial problems that had been hidden from him. "Nearly $70,000 over the past 2 years, I replied, watching their faces as they processed the magnitude of my contribution. "That's $70,000 of my money that's gone to preserve your illusions about our parents' financial stability and your own status as the successful children who make them proud." Sarah gasped audibly at the figure, clearly doing mental calculations about what that amount of money represented in terms of my social work salary. "Megan, that's most of your income. How have you been living? How did you afford to help them that much?" "I haven't been living, Sarah," I replied with bitter honesty. "I've been surviving. I ended a relationship because I couldn't afford to go out. I've been eating rice and beans for dinner most nights. I haven't bought new clothes in 2 years. I've been working freelance consulting jobs every evening and weekend to make up the income I've been giving to Mom and Dad." The picture I was painting of my sacrifices was clearly devastating to my siblings, who were beginning to understand that their sister's modest lifestyle was actually the result of financial hardship caused by supporting their parents. But I wasn't finished revealing the full scope of the family's dysfunction and deception. "And the best part," I continued, my voice dripping with sarcasm, "is that Mom and Dad made me promise to keep this secret because they were ashamed to let their successful children know about their financial problems. They couldn't bear the thought that you might judge them for their business failures, so they came to the daughter they'd already written off as unsuccessful because they knew I wouldn't lose respect for them. Michael finally found his voice, though it was shaky with emotion. "Dad, why didn't you tell us? We could have helped. We're family, we should have been supporting each other through this crisis." His hurt was evident as he realized that his parents had trusted their supposedly unsuccessful daughter more than their son who was supposed to inherit the family business. My father's response was barely audible. "We didn't want you to think less of us. You've all worked so hard to build successful lives, and we didn't want our failures to diminish your pride in us." The admission revealed the psychological complexity of the situation. Their favoritism toward my siblings had made them too ashamed to seek help from the children they'd positioned as superior. But my mother wasn't ready to accept responsibility or show genuine remorse. "This still doesn't excuse Megan's betrayal of our trust," she said, doubling down on her victimization narrative. "We're going through a difficult time, and instead of supporting us privately, she's chosen to humiliate us publicly just to make herself look like a martyr." That accusation was the final straw that pushed me to reveal the most damaging truth of all, the information that would destroy not just Christmas dinner but the entire family dynamic that had oppressed me for 25 years. My mother's continued attempts to portray me as the villain in a situation where I'd been the family's primary financial supporter for 2 years finally pushed me to reveal the most damaging information I'd been holding back. Her refusal to acknowledge my sacrifices or show any gratitude for my help, combined with her audacity in calling me a betrayer for exposing their deception, convinced me that complete honesty was the only path forward, regardless of the consequences. "You want to talk about betrayal, Mom?" I said, pulling out my phone and opening the banking app that showed my transaction history. "Let's talk about how you and Dad have been lying not just about your financial situation, but about what you've been doing with the money I've been giving you." The threat in my voice was unmistakable as I prepared to expose the final layer of their deception. My siblings looked confused and concerned as they tried to understand what additional revelations could possibly make the situation worse. My parents' faces went white as they realized that I had access to information they'd hoped would remain hidden forever. The financial records on my phone told a story that went beyond simple assistance with mortgage payments and household expenses. "Did you know," I continued, addressing my siblings while keeping my eyes fixed on my parents, "that Mom and Dad haven't just been using my money to pay their basic expenses? They've been using it to maintain the lifestyle that allows them to play the generous parents who can afford to give expensive gifts and host elaborate family gatherings." I scrolled through my banking records, reading aloud transactions that painted a devastating picture of financial manipulation. The $2,000 check I wrote in November? Mom told me it was for emergency roof repairs. But I found the receipt. It was for the down payment on Amanda's new car that they gave her as an early Christmas present. Amanda's face showed shock and horror as she realized that the generous gift she'd been grateful for had actually come from the sister my parents had been systematically undervaluing. "Mom, Dad, is that true? Did you use Megan's money to buy my car?" Her medical ethics training was clearly struggling with the implications of unknowingly accepting a gift that had been fraudulently obtained. "The $1,500 in September that was supposedly for Dad's business equipment?" I continued relentlessly. "That paid for Jake's birthday party at the country club and the expensive watch you gave him as a gift." Jake's entrepreneurial confidence was crumbling as he processed the fact that his parents had essentially stolen money from me to fund celebrations of his success. Sarah was starting to cry as she anticipated what she might learn about her own gifts and experiences. "Megan, please tell me they didn't, the money for my art supplies and the photography equipment." Her voice trailed off as she realized that her creative achievements might have been subsidized by the sister whose own artistic interests had always been dismissed as impractical. "The $3,000 in August for critical business expenses?" I said, confirming her fears. "That bought your new camera equipment and paid for the professional website design that launched your freelance career to the next level." The irony was devastating. My parents had used my money to fund Sarah's creative success while consistently criticizing my own career choices as financially impractical. Michael's inheritance of the family business was looking increasingly meaningless as he realized that the company's apparent stability had been artificially maintained through my financial support. What about the business modernization we've been planning? The new equipment and software systems? His voice was hollow as he anticipated learning that his future career prospects were built on stolen money. The $5,000 in July for updating business operations bought the construction equipment you've been using, Michael, plus the software systems you thought Dad had purchased through improved business profits. The revelation that his career development had been funded through fraud against his sister was clearly devastating to his sense of professional integrity. But the most damaging revelation was still to come: information that would destroy not just my parents' credibility but their relationships with all of their children. I'd discovered that their financial deception went beyond simple misuse of my assistance to include active fraud that had put our entire family at legal and financial risk. And the $8,000 I gave them in December of last year for their emergency mortgage crisis? I said, building to the climax of my exposé. Half of that went to mortgage payments, but the other half funded their vacation to Europe that they told everyone they'd saved for through careful budgeting. The same vacation where they posted photos of expensive restaurants and luxury hotels while I was eating ramen noodles every night to afford their lifestyle. The table erupted again as my siblings processed the magnitude of their parents' deception and manipulation. But I wasn't finished. There was one more truth that would complete their destruction and ensure that their victim narrative could never be rebuilt. But here's the best part, I said, my voice gaining strength as I prepared to deliver the killing blow. While they've been accepting thousands of dollars from me monthly and using it to fund gifts for all of you, they've been telling everyone that my financial struggles are evidence of my poor life choices and lack of ambition. I turned to face my parents directly for the final accusation. You've been using my money to make yourselves look like generous parents while publicly criticizing me for the financial limitations that your dependence on my support has created. You've been literally stealing from me and then mocking me for being poor because of your theft. The silence that followed was profound and terrible. My siblings were staring at our parents with expressions of horror and disgust as they fully understood the scope of the manipulation and abuse they'd witnessed. The family hierarchy that had seemed so stable and natural was revealed as a complete fiction built on financial fraud and psychological manipulation. Amanda spoke first, her voice shaking with rage. Mom, Dad, how could you do this? How could you steal from Megan and then humiliate her for the sacrifices she was making to help you? Her medical ethics training was clearly struggling with the implications of her parents' systematic deception and abuse. Jake's business background made him particularly aware of the legal implications. This isn't just morally wrong, it's fraud. You've been taking money under false pretenses and using it for purposes you never disclosed. Megan could file criminal charges against you for this. Sarah was sobbing as she realized that her artistic success had been tainted by the knowledge that it was built on her sister's sacrifices. I don't want any of it. The camera, the website, the equipment, I don't want anything that came from money you stole from Megan. Her creative integrity couldn't accept achievements that had been funded through fraud. Michael was perhaps the most devastated because his entire future had been built on false foundations. The business isn't really recovering, is it, Dad? Everything you've shown me about improved profits and growth potential, it's all been artificial because of Megan's money. His career plans were crumbling as he realized that the family company he'd expected to inherit was actually bankrupt. But my parents' response to being fully exposed was predictable and pathetic. Instead of accepting responsibility for their fraud and abuse, they doubled down on their victimization narrative and attempted to blame me for destroying the family through my revelations. You've ruined Christmas, my mother said, her voice filled with self-pity rather than remorse. You've destroyed our family just to prove a point about being unappreciated. This is exactly the kind of selfish, vindictive behavior that shows why we were right to be concerned about your character. The audacity of her response, blaming me for destroying a family that I'd been financially supporting for 2 years while being systematically abused and defrauded, was so breathtaking that even my siblings were shocked into defending me. Amanda stood up from the table, her face flushed with anger as she confronted our parents for the first time in her adult life. Are you seriously blaming Megan for this? Amanda's voice carried the authority she'd developed through years of making life-and-death medical decisions. She's been supporting this family financially while you've been lying to all of us and stealing from her. The only person who's destroyed this family is you, Mom, with your cruelty and dishonesty. Jake was equally furious as he processed the business implications of what he'd learned. Do you have any idea what you've done? You've committed fraud, potentially destroyed Megan's financial future, and built all of our relationships on lies. This isn't about Christmas dinner, this is about criminal behavior that's been going on for years. My father finally found his voice, but instead of apologizing or taking responsibility, he tried to justify their actions through appeals to family loyalty and mutual support. We never meant for things to go this far. We were desperate, and Megan was the only one who could help us without judging our failures. We thought we could repay her when the business recovered. But you weren't just borrowing money, Dad, Michael said, his voice hollow with disillusionment. You were stealing it and using it to lie to us about your financial situation. You made us complicit in Megan's abuse by accepting gifts that you'd fraudulently obtained from her earnings. Sarah was still crying, but her tears had transformed from confusion to rage as she fully grasped what our parents had done. You used Megan's money to buy my success and then criticized her for not being as successful as me. How is that different from any other kind of theft and abuse? How are you any different from the criminals Megan deals with in her social work? The comparison to the abusive families that I worked with professionally was particularly devastating because it forced everyone to recognize that our family dynamics weren't just dysfunctional, they were actually criminal. My parents had been systematically exploiting my emotional attachment to them to commit financial fraud, then using the proceeds to manipulate family relationships and maintain their preferred hierarchy. I want every penny back, I said, my voice calm but deadly serious. Every dollar you took under false pretenses, every gift you bought with my money, every expense you covered with funds you obtained through lies. I want full restitution, and I want it documented legally so this never happens again. The financial implications of my demand were staggering because my parents had no assets to liquidate and no income stream that could support the kind of repayment I was demanding. The $70,000 they'd taken from me over 2 years represented more than my father's annual income from his failing business, and their inability to repay would force them into bankruptcy and potentially criminal prosecution. Amanda immediately offered her support for whatever legal action I wanted to pursue. Megan, I'll help you find the best attorney to handle this. What they've done isn't just morally wrong, it's criminal fraud that deserves serious consequences. Her medical career had given her connections to legal professionals who specialized in financial crimes, and she was clearly prepared to use those resources to help me seek justice. Jake's entrepreneurial background made him acutely aware of the business implications. The family company is probably going to have to be liquidated to pay restitution, which means Michael's career plans are finished anyway. There's no point in protecting a business that's built on fraud and deception. His willingness to sacrifice our family's business to ensure justice for me was both surprising and deeply meaningful. Sarah's artistic integrity couldn't accept keeping anything that had been purchased with stolen money. I'm returning everything they bought me with your money, Megan. The camera equipment, the website costs, everything. I don't want my career built on your sacrifices. Her commitment to giving up the tools that had launched her success demonstrated a level of moral courage that I hadn't expected from my youngest sister. Michael's response was the most complex because his entire future had been built around inheriting a family business that was now revealed to be worthless. I'll help liquidate everything if that's what it takes to pay you back, Megan. The business, the equipment, whatever assets exist, you deserve to recover every dollar they stole from you. But my parents' reaction to their children's unified support for me was predictable and pathetic. Instead of accepting responsibility and seeking forgiveness, they escalated their attacks on my character and motivations, apparently believing that they could still manipulate the situation through emotional manipulation and blame shifting. This is what we get for helping an ungrateful child, my mother said, her voice filled with venom. We opened our home to someone who obviously resents this family's success, and now she's trying to destroy us out of jealousy and spite. The projection was breathtaking. She was describing her own behavior toward me while attributing it to my response to their abuse. My father's contribution was equally delusional. Megan has always been jealous of her siblings' achievements, and now she's found a way to make herself the center of attention by playing the victim. This whole situation could have been handled privately if she hadn't decided to make a public spectacle out of our family's private struggles. The continued victim blaming and gaslighting from my parents, even after being exposed as thieves and frauds, finally convinced my siblings that the people they'd respected and loved were actually toxic manipulators who were incapable of genuine remorse or change. The family meeting that had started as a Christmas celebration was ending with the complete destruction of relationships that had defined our family for decades. Amanda spoke for all of us when she delivered the final judgment on our parents' behavior. You're not victims in this situation. You're criminals who've been systematically abusing and stealing from your own daughter while manipulating the rest of us into being complicit in your crimes. Until you accept full responsibility for what you've done and make complete restitution to Megan, none of us want anything to do with you. The Christmas dinner that was supposed to celebrate our family's success and unity had instead exposed it as a criminal enterprise built on fraud, theft, and psychological abuse. The parents who'd positioned themselves as the moral center of our family had been revealed as the source of its corruption, while the daughter they'd dismissed as useless had been revealed as its financial foundation and moral compass. 6 months after the explosive Christmas dinner that destroyed our family's facade forever, my parents were facing bankruptcy, criminal charges, and complete social isolation while I was experiencing the strongest relationships with my siblings that we'd ever had. The legal proceedings I'd initiated had been swift and comprehensive, with Amanda's attorney connections helping me pursue both civil restitution and criminal fraud charges that carried serious penalties, including possible prison time and permanent financial monitoring. The criminal investigation had revealed that my parents' theft was even more extensive than I'd initially realized. Forensic accounting of their financial records showed that they'd been systematically misappropriating my support money for over 2 years, using fraudulent explanations to obtain funds that they then diverted to maintain their lifestyle and purchase gifts that enhanced their image as successful parents. The total amount of theft exceeded $85,000 when interest and penalties were included. The district attorney's office had been particularly interested in pursuing the case because it involved sophisticated financial fraud that targeted a family member's emotional attachment and professional obligations. My work in social services made me a sympathetic victim whose dedication to helping vulnerable families had been exploited by her own parents for financial gain. The irony that I spent my professional life protecting families from exactly this kind of abuse while experiencing it in my own home was not lost on prosecutors or the media. My parents' attempts to defend their actions had been pathetic and counterproductive, focusing on their financial desperation rather than acknowledging the systematic nature of their deception and abuse. Their attorney had advised them to accept a plea agreement that included full restitution, community service, and financial monitoring, but their pride and continued refusal to accept responsibility had led them to reject reasonable settlement offers and face criminal trial. The media attention surrounding the case had been particularly devastating for my parents because it exposed their hypocrisy and cruelty to the entire community that had known our family for decades. Local news coverage focused on the shocking story of successful parents who'd stolen from their social worker daughter while publicly criticizing her career choices and lifestyle. The contrast between their public image and their private behavior was so stark that it became a cautionary tale about the dangers of valuing appearances over integrity. My siblings' response to learning the truth about our family dynamics had been uniformly supportive and protective of me in ways that were deeply healing after years of feeling like the family outsider. Amanda had not only helped me find excellent legal representation but had also publicly defended my character and motivations to anyone who questioned my decision to pursue criminal charges against our parents. Jake had used his business connections to help me find freelance consulting opportunities that allowed me to rebuild my financial security while the legal proceedings moved forward. His entrepreneurial network valued my analytical skills and nonprofit experience, leading to contract work that paid significantly more than my social work salary and gave me the flexibility to manage the stress of the criminal case. Sarah had become my strongest emotional supporter, calling regularly to check on my well-being and accompanying me to court hearings when I needed moral support. Her artistic sensitivity made her particularly aware of the psychological damage that years of favoritism and criticism had caused, and she'd begun therapy to process her own guilt about unknowingly benefiting from my financial exploitation. Michael's response had been the most practically meaningful because he'd taken over responsibility for liquidating our father's business assets to contribute to my restitution payments. His construction industry connections had helped ensure that equipment and tools were sold at fair market value rather than being disposed of at fire sale prices that would have reduced the recovery amount. The community's reaction to my parents' exposure had been overwhelmingly supportive of my decision to seek justice and critical of their systematic abuse and theft. People who'd known our family for years came forward to share their own observations about the unfair treatment I'd received and their admiration for my resilience and integrity in the face of such sustained psychological manipulation. My professional reputation had actually been enhanced by the publicity surrounding the case, as colleagues and clients recognized that my personal experience with family financial abuse made me uniquely qualified to help other families navigate similar situations. Several nonprofit organizations had approached me about developing programs to help adult children who were being financially exploited by their parents, recognizing that this type of abuse was more common than most people realized. The financial recovery process had been more successful than I'd anticipated because my parents had been forced to liquidate virtually all of their assets to satisfy the restitution order. Their house had been sold to pay the bulk of what they owed me, while their cars, jewelry, and other valuable possessions had been sold to cover the remainder. The total recovery amount exceeded $80,000, which was more than I'd originally given them due to interest and penalty calculations. But perhaps the most satisfying aspect of the justice process was watching how my parents' victim narrative had completely collapsed as the evidence of their systematic abuse became public. Their attempts to portray themselves as desperate parents who'd made mistakes out of love were undermined by the documented evidence of their deliberate deception and their continued cruelty toward me even after being caught. The plea agreement they'd eventually been forced to accept included not just financial restitution but also requirements for counseling and financial monitoring that would prevent them from victimizing other family members in the future. The terms essentially put them under permanent supervision that acknowledged their inability to manage money or relationships responsibly. Their social isolation had been complete and permanent, as friends and extended family members who learned the truth about their behavior chose to maintain relationships with my siblings and me while cutting contact with them. The respect and admiration they'd worked so hard to cultivate through their children's achievements was replaced by disgust and judgment about their character and treatment of their own daughter. My parents' current living situation reflected the complete reversal of our family's financial hierarchy. They were now living in a small apartment paid for with public assistance and whatever part-time work my father could find, while I'd used my legal settlement and improved income to purchase a comfortable home that represented the financial security they'd tried to steal from me. The psychological impact of their downfall was evident in their continued attempts to contact me through intermediaries, seeking forgiveness and reconciliation that would restore their access to family relationships and potentially financial support. But their letters and messages revealed no genuine understanding of the damage they'd caused or acceptance of responsibility for their systematic abuse and theft. My siblings had maintained a united front in refusing to provide any emotional or financial support to our parents until they demonstrated genuine remorse and completed the terms of their legal obligations. The family hierarchy that had once elevated them as the moral and financial centers of our family had been permanently inverted, with their children now serving as the guardians of family values and financial responsibility. The holidays that had once been sources of stress and criticism for me had been transformed into celebrations with siblings who finally understood and appreciated my character and contributions. Christmas 2024 was spent in my new home, with Amanda, Jake, Sarah, and Michael all contributing to a family gathering that was based on genuine love and mutual respect rather than financial manipulation and conditional acceptance. 2 years have passed since that devastating Christmas dinner when my mother called me the most useless child, and today I'm writing this from the home office of my beautiful house, purchased with money recovered from my parents' fraud plus the savings I've been able to accumulate since ending their financial parasitism. The irony couldn't be more perfect. The daughter they dismissed as worthless now owns more property than they ever did, while the parents who positioned themselves as successful are living in subsidized housing and working minimum wage jobs to survive the consequences of their crimes. The most satisfying development has been how completely our family dynamics have been reconstructed around honesty, mutual respect, and genuine appreciation rather than the manipulation and conditional love that characterized our relationships for decades. My siblings and I now have monthly family dinners that rotate between our homes, creating the kind of authentic family connection that my parents had always claimed to value but had systematically undermined through their favoritism and abuse. Amanda has become my closest confidant and strongest supporter, using her medical career's demands for ethical behavior to help me process the psychological damage from years of being financially exploited while being told I was useless. She's also been instrumental in helping me understand that my parents' abuse was a form of psychological trauma that required professional treatment, and she supported my decision to pursue therapy to fully recover from their systematic manipulation. Jake's entrepreneurial success has continued to flourish, but now his achievements feel genuine and meaningful because they're not being compared to my artificially constrained circumstances. He's actually become one of my biggest professional supporters, referring consulting clients to me and advocating for my expertise in nonprofit management and family crisis intervention. The brother who once seemed impossibly successful is now one of my most enthusiastic champions. Sarah's artistic career has reached new heights since she rebuilt it on her own merit rather than on equipment purchased with my stolen money. She's developed a successful art therapy practice that helps families heal from financial abuse and manipulation, work that was directly inspired by learning about my experience and wanting to help other people who'd been similarly victimized by family members. Michael chose not to inherit our father's business, instead starting his own construction company based on ethical practices and transparent financial management. His success has been slower but more sustainable than what he would have achieved through our father's fraud-based operation, and he's become a respected contractor who builds his reputation on integrity rather than family connections. The criminal case against my parents was resolved through a plea agreement that satisfied my need for justice while avoiding the emotional trauma of a lengthy trial. They both pled guilty to felony fraud charges, served 18 months in prison, and are now on probation with requirements for financial counseling and restitution payments that will continue for the next 8 years. Their criminal records ensure that they'll never again be able to obtain credit or financial authority that could enable similar abuse. But perhaps the most meaningful consequence has been their complete social isolation from the community that once respected them. Friends, neighbors, and extended family members who learned about their systematic theft and abuse chose to maintain relationships with my siblings and me while cutting all contact with them. The social capital they'd tried to build through their children's achievements was permanently destroyed when people learned how that success had been artificially subsidized through financial crimes. The professional consequences for my career have been overwhelmingly positive, as my experience with family financial abuse has made me a sought-after expert in helping other families navigate similar situations. I've developed training programs for social workers and family counselors about recognizing and addressing financial exploitation within families, work that's been personally healing while also preventing other people from experiencing what I endured. My romantic life has also flourished since breaking free from the financial constraints and psychological damage my parents had imposed. I'm now engaged to David, a fellow social worker who understands and respects my career choice and has been amazed by my resilience and integrity in handling our family crisis. Our relationship is built on the kind of mutual support and genuine appreciation that I never experienced while being emotionally manipulated by people who claimed to love me. The house I purchased represents more than just financial recovery, it's a symbol of the security and independence that my parents tried to prevent me from achieving through their systematic theft and psychological abuse. Every mortgage payment I make is a reminder that I succeeded despite their attempts to sabotage my financial stability, and every family gathering I host demonstrates that authentic relationships are stronger than those built on manipulation and conditional acceptance. My parents' continued attempts to reconcile with our family have been consistently rejected because they've never shown genuine remorse for their behavior or understanding of the damage they caused. Their letters from prison and probation have focused on their own suffering and financial hardship rather than acknowledging the systematic nature of their abuse or taking responsibility for the trauma they inflicted. The most pathetic aspect of their current situation is how they've tried to portray themselves as victims of their children's cruelty rather than accepting responsibility for the criminal behavior that destroyed our family relationships. Even facing bankruptcy and social isolation, they've maintained the same victim narrative and blame shifting that characterized their response to being exposed at Christmas dinner. But their downfall has also created opportunities for healing and growth that wouldn't have been possible while they continued manipulating our family dynamics. My siblings and I have been able to build genuine relationships based on our shared values and mutual respect rather than competing for parental approval that was distributed through favoritism and financial manipulation. The therapy I pursued to recover from years of psychological abuse has also helped me understand that my parents' behavior was never about my inadequacies or failures. It was about their own insecurities and moral deficiencies that they projected onto the family member they perceived as least able to resist their manipulation. Understanding this dynamic has been crucial for rebuilding my self-confidence and learning to value my own worth independently of their approval or recognition. The nonprofit sector has embraced my expertise in family financial abuse, leading to speaking engagements, consulting opportunities, and program development work that's more financially rewarding than my original social work position. The career they dismissed as impractical has become the foundation for professional success that exceeds anything they achieved through their fraudulent methods. So here's my question for everyone who's followed this incredible journey from Christmas humiliation to complete vindication. Have you ever had someone dismiss your worth so completely that their cruelty became the catalyst for you to discover your own strength and value? Sometimes the people who hurt us most severely are actually forcing us to develop the resilience and independence that we need to build lives that exceed their limited imagination. My mother's declaration that I was the most useless child was intended to reinforce a family hierarchy that kept me subordinate and financially exploitable. Instead, it became the moment when I realized that the people calling me useless were actually the ones who were parasitically dependent on my usefulness, and that their abuse was projection of their own inadequacies and failures. If this story has resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about family financial abuse, psychological manipulation, and ultimate justice. Share this video with anyone who's been told they're not good enough by family members, or anyone who's discovered that standing up to family bullies can completely transform toxic relationships into healthy ones. Drop a comment telling me about your own experiences with family favoritism, financial manipulation, or times when revealing difficult truths led to positive changes in family dynamics. Thank you for joining me on this journey from family scapegoat to family success story. Remember that the people who try to make you feel worthless are often the ones who are actually worthless themselves, and that sometimes the best gift you can give to toxic family members is the consequences of their own behavior. The Christmas they tried to ruin by calling me useless became the Christmas when their own uselessness was exposed forever.